and he's the top of the mind guy, all about personality. It can give a very different approach to everything, and he puts his theory into action. And Martin Greene's speech is, "If I only knew." If I only knew Martin Greene. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. I'm so excited to be here. And if I only knew then, it's back in 1968, and we're getting ready to buy the new family car. Now, you have to understand, my dad typically would buy a new car every 3 years because he was on the road. He had a selling route. He would go to Pennsylvania, New York, and he put a lot of miles on a car. So typically after 3 years, he would pass the car down to my mom. And normally he would just show up and the car would be in the driveway and that would be the end of it. But this year was different. This year, he drove us to the dealer back about 20, 30 miles away where he used to work as a car salesman back many years ago until the car dealership burned down. That was in Highland Park, New Jersey. It was called 10 Brick Motors. Well, we showed up, and again, this is my mom and dad and my older brother, who's 4 years older. I was 15 years old at the time. My brother was 19. And we show up in the dealership, and there are two cars that immediately caught my dad's eye. The one on the right, which was a Plymouth Belvedere, and the one on the left, which was a Dodge Charger. Now, you have to understand who my parents were. And I want to just show you a family picture real quick. This is my, whoa, that's not working real well, okay? There you go. Well, my mom and dad were very conservative people, my dad particularly. And I'm going to just show you real quick who my dad was. He was this guy. My dad was kind of authoritarian. He believed in stability and structure, responsibility, and everything was rules. And everything was, if you think about a person who thinks within the box, that was my dad. And he rarely strayed from that. The only time he would show emotion and a twinkle of satisfaction was if we were talking about two things. One was cars, and the other was dancing. The only time I saw him take true delight was when he was dancing, especially with my mother. He was one of those people, if you go to a party and everybody was circling around somebody and they're watching them dance, it was usually my mom and dad. But then cars were his other passion. At one point in his life, he actually drove a race car a lap around, but then he pulled into the pit as soon as he realized he wasn't as crazy as the other people on the track. And that was Dad. He had an opportunity to be a professional dancer, but he passed up on that opportunity because he wanted to raise a family, and he knew that that was not a family thing. So he went into the business of sales, which was selling cars at the time. So that was my dad. Now my mom, on the other hand, her personality was more this woman. Very much a nurturer, all about relationships, avoided confrontation at all kinds, about ethics. She could see through somebody that was phony in a minute's notice and just turn them completely off. And that was her thing. She was a contributor to a lot of organizations because she believed in mission. She always did vote. She was always a voting person. She worked at the polls all the time, and that's who she was. And of course, nurturing was her critical thing. So now here we are at this car dealership, and we're making a decision about buying this new car. So which one's it going to be? Well, you can tell the one on the right is the family car. That's the one that you would expect people of that nature to be. A family car, safe, and that car cost about $4,000 or $5,000 at the time. I'm sure my dad got it for less because he was in the car business and he knew the people who owned the dealership. But the one on the left was the one my brother and I had our eye on for obvious reasons. It was a fast car. It had a 383 engine. It was really beautiful looking. It was sporty. And my dad had a twinkle of his eye about that car also, but he knew he'd never be able to convince my mom. Now, that car cost around $20,000, which was almost twice what my parents' house cost. So what a deal, right? Hard to make that transition. So how did my brother and I talk them into buying the car on the left? Well, it had one feature that no car had ever had before, and that was it was the very first car that had shoulder harnesses. Now, you have to understand my parents, my mother especially, if you were sitting in the front seat of the car, what happened when you stopped short was she would go like this and stop you. That was the way she stopped you. So having a car with shoulder harnesses was really a big thing. So now it's A or B. Do we get the standard family car, or do we get this car with the safety features? Now that car could go from 0 to 60 in a couple of seconds. It was really a hot car. And guess what? We were able to convince them to buy that car because it had the shoulder harnesses. So we pull out of that car. Now, years down the road, my mom would inherit that car 3 years later, and you'd have to see her. She took me to the University of Maryland on a trip, an orientation trip, and she was going 100 miles an hour. And a cop actually stopped her, and she got a warning. But it was impossible not to drive fast in that car. So, but the point of that story is that my brother and I used something. We used their personalities, not against them, but with them. My dad really wanted that blue car, but of course his normal tendency would be to have gone to the family car, especially because it was a lot cheaper. He was very concerned about budget and all that stuff. So it was because we understood who they were that we were able to convince him that my dad, the safety was very important to him, and to my mom, it was her family. So safety, of course, was important. So we were able to get to that point. Now, what's the point of this for you and for me? Well, I wish I had known then and later on and realized what I had been able to accomplish with that, because later on, I was able to always connect with people when it came to a mission. But when it came to building an entrepreneurial career, I struggled. I hated sales because all I wanted to tell people was everything about what it was they were buying. If I was selling people this car, I would have told them everything about the 383 engine, about everything that they needed to know about the car, even if all they were interested was how fast does it go and how fast can I get there. That's all they were interested in. But that was not I didn't know that. So the limitations on me were pretty much that I only knew how to sell to people based on my personality type. And so I really struggled with it, because if a person wasn't a nurturing personality, that's who I am. Like my mom, I actually have my mom's personality. So I was very good at developing communities. I was very good at organizing communities. But when it came to selling a person a thing and asking for money, well, one of the very important things about people who are nurturers is that they're much more concerned about the mission and not very concerned about the money. And that really is a hardship, right? So when it comes to selling things, the ones who are best at it usually is this type, because they have the freedom and the flexibility. They want to win. So if you've ever seen a contest where it's a sales contest, this is the person who usually does best, because they want to be at the head of the pack. Well, how did I learn all this stuff? And what is this really? This is called BANK. And it's actually an acronym for Blueprint, Action, Nurturing, and Knowledge. And each personality type has their own thing. And we all have all four of those personality types, but one usually dominates the other three in most cases. Now, how does that affect you? Well, I was introduced to this really practicing in a Toastmaster speech in 2 years ago, almost to this day. We were practicing for a district conference, a different district speech, and one of my friends, Valerie Johnson, was actually doing a speech about this, and she taught me about this. And at the time, I was a John Maxwell trainer, and one of my favorite books of John Maxwell's is called Everyone Communicates, But Few Connect. Well, I understood immediately within the 5 minutes of Valerie's speech that this was the way to connect. And so I ran up to her quickly afterwards. I pretty much grabbed the cards out of her hand that she showed me, and I gave her a $20 bill and went home immediately. And I, what we call, cracked the code of my wife to find out what her personality was. And I found out something instantly, which was we are opposites. Now, you really didn't have to know that, because my wife's personality is very much like my dad's, very much a blueprint. And she's very much in the box. She's worried about the budget, and thank God, because I'm not. And she pays all the bills and I don't. So it really comes in handy. A lot of people marry their opposite, and opposites attract, right? But sometimes opposites also attack. And there are times that we did, like for instance, on the golf course. A blueprint personality on the golf course is worried about the rules and making sure that if you hit the ball out of bounds, you take a penalty. And if you hit the ball in the sand trap, that you clean it out like it was yours. And that's what she would do, where I would be worried about getting her to the next hole, getting her to the green. So we would have arguments about, why are you spending so much time cleaning out that sand trap? And it was really excruciating until I learned about BANK. because once I understood that she had this personality type, I could now empathize with her. And that's really the point of all this, because success in any organization and being the leader of organization is about having what we call emotional intelligence. It's not about what happens to you and not what people say to you. It's how do you respond to it? How do you deal with people of different personalities within an organization? And how can this help you? Well, let's say you're at the time where it's time to pick new leaders and new roles in an organization. And let's say you wanted to pick a treasurer. Well, you wouldn't want to pick an action personality as a treasurer because they just want to get stuff done. They just want to go. They don't want to be held to a schedule. But if you picked a blueprint person who was used to that kind of thing, they're worried about the process and planning, and they're going to keep that budget intact. So knowing who you're picking as your treasurer is a really good thing. On the other hand, if you're going to pick a membership person, well, you'd want to speak somebody who wants to build a community, probably. So you're going to want to speak to a nurturer person, but also somebody who takes action, because if you have a PR person who won't take action, your organization isn't going to grow. And then the other side of it is, who's going to be your director of it, your VP of education? Well, you might want to have a knowledge person, because a knowledge person is very much interested in self-mastery. They're certainly interested in the technology. So they're going to take charge of the Pathways program. They're going to help your people learn pathways because that's what they do. They love intelligence. They're all about the big picture, and they're all about accuracy. So and also research and development. So they're going to follow all those things. So if you have a VP of Ed, you probably want to have somebody who is a knowledge person, at least have a high level of knowledge, and probably somebody who takes action as well, because they actually have to go in and do all the VP of education things. So you can see that knowing these codes, knowing the other person's code, can help you in all sorts of ways, including when you do your speeches, to make sure that you're communicating with every personality type as you're doing it. And so what I want to conclude with is that you have a choice, really. If you're going to help people make a decision and find out the way that you can help them best and help them grow, you need to be able to be interested in them and not interesting. The key is to be interested, not interesting, and listen to learn, and listen to absorb, and listen to them so that you know who they are and where their role is going to be in that future organization. Back to you, Oscar.
Thank you, Martin. What an insightful speech. One of the more insightful stories I've heard in a long time.